Detective Samuel Harlan had always trusted his instincts. After 20 years on the force, he could tell when a criminal was sloppy, when a witness was hiding something, and, most importantly, when a mind was unraveling. But nothing in all his years of experience could have prepared him for the case that would tear at his own sanity. It started with a body. The first victim was found in a cramped apartment on the east side of the city. A young woman, barely 22, her life snuffed out with meticulous care. There was no sign of struggle. No fingerprints. No DNA beyond what seemed like random traces left deliberately to confuse investigators. The coroner's report described her death as methodical, almost ritualistic. But what caught Harlan's attention wasn't the killing, it was the note. It was handwritten, delicate, precise. "Do you remember me, Samuel?" it read. He stared at the words for a long time. It wasn't his handwriting, not exactly. But something about it felt familiar. Wrongly familiar, like a fragment of a memory misplaced in the wrong drawer of his mind. He brushed it off. A taunt. A trap. That was all. Detectives often received letters from killers. This one wasn't unusual. Not yet. By the second victim, unease had settled in his chest like a permanent weight. Another woman, another note. This time the words were different, but the tone was the same, intimate, probing, invasive. "You saw me, Samuel. You know me." And that was when the doubt crept in. Harlan couldn't remember ever seeing this man. He couldn't even remember if he had seen a man at all. And yet, the phrasing gnawed at him. Like a half-remembered dream, it clung to the edges of his consciousness. He began seeing patterns in places others didn't. At crime scenes, in photographs, in the way victims were positioned. He started noticing anomalies in his own apartment, objects moved, files misplaced. At first, he told himself he was tired. The work, the late nights, the constant pressure, he was human. But slowly, a terrifying possibility emerged. What if this killer wasn't just playing with the city, but with him? By the third crime, Harlan's team was frustrated. There were no fingerprints, no CCTV footage, no witnesses. The victims seemed unrelated. Age, profession, social circles, they had nothing in common except the way they died. Except that one person who knew them all, him. Or at least, the person he might be in the killer's eyes. He began keeping a journal, noting everything he remembered, or thought he remembered. But the entries grew stranger. Sometimes he wrote about events he had no recollection of. Places he had never visited. People he had never met. Each entry made him feel as though he were losing ground inside his own mind. The first time he mentioned it to someone, it was to his partner, Detective Lena Chen. I think he's putting memories in my head," he said quietly, almost ashamed. Chen didn't laugh, though. She frowned, concerned, skeptical. "Samuel, that's not how memories work." "I know," he said. "I know. But I can't explain it. I see things, images, scenes, conversations, and later, I find evidence that matches. Things I don't remember witnessing. And it's always connected to the next victim." Chen suggested therapy, a psychologist. Maybe stress, maybe PTSD. He agreed, reluctantly. But even under the careful scrutiny of a professional, the feeling didn't fade. If anything, it intensified. Then the phone calls started. Late at night, a voice he didn't recognize would whisper fragments of sentences. Not threats. Not demands. Just memories. "Remember the park, the man with the dog, you laughed, it was raining." Harlan would check the park. Nothing. But days later, a photograph would appear, dropped on his doorstep, showing exactly that scene. The man. The dog. The rain. And somehow, impossibly, his own face reflected in a windowpane in the corner of the photo. He wasn't sure if he had taken it, or if he had been there. Sleep became impossible. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw faces he didn't recognize, and heard conversations he didn't recall. His own reflection sometimes looked slightly wrong, as if the face in the mirror wasn't entirely his own. And yet, when he spoke, it was his voice. When he acted, it was his hands. But the experiences, were they his? Or were they someone else's memories, meticulously inserted to fracture his mind? He started following leads that weren't leads at all, tracing people and places that didn't exist. His team noticed. Chen confronted him in the precinct one evening. "Sam, you're losing it," she said. Her voice was stern but tinged with fear. "We can't keep chasing ghosts." "They're not ghosts," he replied, voice tight with frustration. "They're clues. They're breadcrumbs he leaves in my mind. He wants me to see the path, to think I'm finding it myself. But I'm not." Despite his paranoia, Harlan persisted. He spent nights in libraries, reading old case files, psychological journals, anything about mind manipulation, memory implantation, the rare phenomena where trauma or suggestion could create false memories. There were reports of it, very few, always fringe. But the more he learned, the more he feared the impossible truth: this killer didn't just murder. He rewired. Weeks passed. The body count rose, 4 victims in total, each one more meticulously staged than the last. And then, the breakthrough, or at least, what felt like one. At a crime scene, Harlan noticed a detail others missed: a small carving on the victim's windowsill, like tally marks, faint, almost invisible. He traced the marks back to his own childhood. To a cabin he had visited once as a boy, a memory so dim he had almost forgotten it. But the marks matched, perfectly. He drove to the cabin. Dust motes floated in the sunlight as he stepped inside. Nothing moved. No one was there. And yet, the air was thick with familiarity, as if the walls remembered him more clearly than he remembered himself. And on the floor, scrawled in a child's uneven hand, was the same phrase from the first note: "Do you remember me, Samuel?" It was a phrase he didn't recall learning. And yet, he knew it. Or thought he did. He wasn't sure if the memory belonged to him or had been planted years ago, before he even understood what memory was. By this point, Harlan stopped sleeping entirely. Food barely touched his mouth. Coffee and cigarettes became the only constants in a world that felt increasingly like someone else's dream. He began recording everything: audio, video, notes, anything that might anchor him to reality. He even set cameras in his own apartment, hoping to catch the intruder. Or, to see himself moving in ways he didn't remember. And then the calls turned direct. "You're close," the voice said over the phone, crisp, controlled. "But you're still too slow. You can't see the game if you're afraid to play." Harlan didn't sleep that night. He paced the apartment, reviewing footage, listening to his own recorded voice describing memories he had never lived. And that's when he saw it. A shadow moving in the corner of the kitchen. Not in real time, it had already happened, on tape. The shape was vague, human, but familiar. And then it smiled. He recoiled. But the smile was his own. For the first time, he realized the horror of what he was facing. The killer didn't just want him to chase. He wanted him to be lost. To doubt everything he knew about himself. And perhaps, in some twisted calculus, to become the next victim, and not just in body, but in mind. Weeks blurred together. Harlan's colleagues began whispering about him behind closed doors. Chen tried to intervene, but he pushed her away. Every lead felt personal. Every note, every phone call, every shadow was addressed directly to him, as if the killer were sculpting his consciousness. Then came the last victim, so far. Harlan found her in a hotel room, posed unnervingly like a memory he didn't recall, with a final note: "Do you see? We are almost the same." It was the first time he truly panicked. Not because of the murder itself, but because he understood now what the killer meant. Almost the same. Not in appearance. Not in action. But in thought, in perception. They were converging. And Harlan wasn't sure which of them would remain himself in the end. Harlan tried to track the killer through traditional means, but every attempt was a trap. He started questioning everything he knew, his training, his instincts, even his own memories. Was the scene he remembered from a week ago real, or had it been planted? Had he ever even seen the killer? Or had the killer seen him, first? One night, staring at the ceiling, he whispered to himself, "If he's in my mind, can I be in his?" And for the first time, he wondered if that wasn't the point at all. Perhaps he was always meant to find the edges of his own memory, only to discover that the killer had been shaping them all along. There were nights he thought he saw the victims walking down the street, familiar faces in unfamiliar contexts, as if his mind was replaying scenes he didn't belong in. He would wake with scratches on his arms, bruises on his shoulders, marks he couldn't account for, evidence of moments he couldn't confirm were real or imagined. And yet, he kept going. Because giving up meant surrender. And Harlan wasn't a man who surrendered. But each day, each lead, each fragment of memory became a battle, a duel fought not on streets or alleys, but inside the tangled recesses of his own mind. He began leaving messages for himself. Notes taped to walls, messages in his phone, "This is real, trust the evidence, not everything you see is yours." Sometimes he followed them. Sometimes he didn't. Eventually, Harlan began to notice something peculiar. The killer was slipping. Not intentionally, but inevitably. Small inconsistencies, a photograph slightly wrong, a detail in a note that contradicted an earlier memory. It was enough to suggest that even a mind as meticulous as the killer's could falter. But Harlan didn't feel relief. Only exhaustion. The case was never solved. The killer vanished, leaving only fragments behind, memories, notes, whispers. And Harlan. Harlan was left with the question that haunted every sleepless night: were the memories truly his own, or had they ever been? Now, years later, when he tells the story, he doesn't speak of the victims. Not anymore. He speaks of the moments, the flashes of thought that belonged to someone else. And sometimes, late at night, when he's alone in a darkened room, he still hears a whisper in the back of his mind. "Do you remember me, Samuel?" And for a second, just a second, he isn't sure he does. Because the scariest thing, he has come to realize, isn't the killer outside the door. It's the one inside your own head.